Welcome, everyone. I am calling the meeting for the Ada County Highway District for March 20th to order. Welcome. We do start our meetings with the Pledge of Allegiance, so if you would all please join.
I pledge allegiance to
of the United States of one nation.
Thank you. Our first order of business is to adopt the agenda. Do I hear a motion?
second.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you, Commissioner Baker. Motion carries. Second on our agenda is the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda are considered to be routine and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a commissioner or citizen so requests, in which case the item will be removed from the consent agenda and placed on the regular agenda. All consent agenda items are commission action items unless noted. Do I hear a motion for the consent agenda?
Madam Chair, I move to approve the consent agenda with the exception of item 4, which would be referred back to staff for 1 week time certain. Second.
I hear first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. We are now on our regular agenda items. All regular agenda items are commissioner action items unless noted. Our first item is the Breezy Place Subdivision Preliminary Plat Waiver of Policy. Mr. Austin Miller will give the staff report. Thank you very much.
Madam President, Commissioners, for the record, Austin Miller, Development Services. Today I'll be presenting the decision briefing for the proposed Breezy Place subdivision. The applicant is requesting planned unit development and preliminary plat approval for a residential subdivision consisting of 18 buildable lots. The applicant has proposed private roads internal to the site. However, the City of Boise staff has indicated their desire to have public street connectivity in the area. The 2.4 acre site is located off Shields Avenue, directly south of the intersection with Ulmer Street. The applicant is requesting a modification of district site distance standards, which are based on AASHTO guidelines requiring 225 feet of unobstructed sightlines at controlled intersections on a 20-mile-per-hour roadway. The proposed intersection location on Shields Avenue is 105 feet west of Ulmer Street. In its current configuration, the intersection of Shields Avenue and Ulmer Street is an uncontrolled intersection as only 2 legs exist, thus is functioning as a 90-degree bend in the roadway. This will provide vehicles exiting the site onto Shields Avenue approximately 120 feet of unobstructed sight lines to vehicles traveling west from Ulmer Street. The triangle shown here represents the necessary sight lines to meet district standards. As you can see, the necessary sight lines are inhibited by vegetation on a neighboring parcel, not a part of this development. These pictures show the view from Shields Avenue looking towards oncoming traffic on Ulmer Street. The view on the left is taken in the summertime, while the picture on the right was taken this winter. The applicant has discussed the potential to trim back some of the existing vegetation and provide improved sight lines. However, some vegetation will remain and an easement cannot be required on the neighboring parcel to ensure sight lines are maintained in the future. The potential to install a stop sign on Ulmer Street was also discussed. In discussions with the applicant, it was expressed that the stop sign in this location would not meet district or AASHTO standards and shouldn't be considered. The proposed intersection would require a 47% modification to district site distance standards. Staff has discussed with the applicant that relocating the proposed roadway to the east, roughly aligning with Ulmer Street, or to the western property line should be required, as both options would improve the site distance for vehicles entering Shields Avenue. Both options are outlined in the staff report. Staff recommends approval of the staff report as written, and I will stand for questions.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, any questions?
Yes.
Go ahead. Ken.
Bolter?
Madam President, a question about that stop sign. I know it didn't meet the requirements of either of those, of our policy or that, or ASHTO. But other than that, was there any feeling on the staff whether or not the stop sign would even be paid attention to?
Our feeling was that no, it would not be warranted or obeyed just because there's no imminent conflict point as you approach the stop sign.
Madam Chairman?
Commissioner Baker?
Yes, I had a question for Austin. Why is the city of Boise wanting to have this be public roads and not private roads? I mean, why do they care?
Madam President, Commissioners, we've discussed this with the city of Boise. There are a couple undeveloped parcels to the west of the site, and it's just their preference that this be a public road to provide a stub street to those other parcels, so when they develop, there's improved public street connectivity, not just a bunch of shared common drive aisles onto Shields.
Right, but does Shields, what kind of traffic does Shields have on it?
We had traffic counts taken at the beginning of this month, and Shields had 230 vehicles per day, 17 of which were in the PM peak hour.
Okay, and if the developer or if the commission goes along with the staff report and requires the relocation of the street, this project's going to have to be redesigned somewhat, will it not?
That is correct, it would.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner Hanson?
Just a similar question. I was just curious whether the city of Boise has started working towards making this connected. It looks like there's at least 5 other properties to the west that they'd have to work with to try and make that connect through and then back up to Shields. I assume that's the way the connectivity would be a through street going through. Do you know where they are on that? This seems awfully preliminary for this to come in at this point if we don't know even to whether the post, this street will one day be extended type of sign.
Madam President, Commissioners, we have discussed a preliminary design, and we have also received 2 minor land division applications just west of this site that the city has been working with the applicant to preserve for future right-of-way, so when development comes in, we can get a public street extension there as well. So there has been some discussion. They have a concept, however, that's all it is at this time.
So the request is basically, you can't put your access street, whether it's private or public, at the point at which you're proposing it. You've got to put it on one end or the other, but what that design looks like, it'll still have to come back to ACHD at a later date, depending on what that might look like and whether it's a public road or a private road and all the other aspects to that. So is that true?
That is correct.
Okay, so this is why I wonder why we would have to deal with this now with so many things still in limbo with respect to the property and the city.
So we would not receive an additional preliminary plat application. However, prior to them moving forward with the plat, engineered plans would need to be submitted to ACHD for review. And at that point, we would review the intersection location. And what staff is recommending is that the current proposed location be denied and it either be shifted to either the east or west property line.
Thank you. I appreciate this. One of the frustrations of having 2 separate agencies, this should be worked out, I think, with the city first.
Thank you. Any further questions from the commission?
Madam Chairman?
Commissioner Baker?
Yeah, I just have one more. What is the classification of Shields?
Madam President,
Street
Commissioners,
classification?
Shields is a local street.
A local street. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Miller. Is the applicant here? Would like to testify? Thank you. If you could please state your name and your address for our record.
Are you going to be able to hear me okay? For the record, Penelope Constantikis, representing the applicant, Post Office Box 405, Boise, 83701. And there are two parcels with this site, so I am representing both property owners. I'd like to talk about the current conditions at the site to begin with. So the first slide shows the original Randall Acres subdivision. That's going to be a PDF. Yeah. With the subject site identified down in the bottom corner with the pink and orange. So this subdivision was platted in 1951, and the street layout was appropriate for a suburban/rural subdivision. With the recent annexation of this area into the city of Boise, Randall Acres is now being retrofitted for a suburban-urban development layout. The original street layout no longer functions with the change in the intensity of the use, unless the parcels are all developed as minor land divisions, which of course means that you won't have the opportunity to improve the street frontage with sidewalks, curb and gutter. I also did want to mention that we converted our streets to public some time ago, so there's a little bit of a delay between the staff reports, but we shifted our streets to public streets probably 3 or 4 weeks ago. I apologize that you didn't get that information. So the minor land divisions do concentrate some access along Shields Avenue, but the net result is that it's not much different than having a bunch of homes with all independent street accesses. Boise City, as I've stated, is pushing for a more formal development process for this area. Slide 2, if you would, please. I just wanted to mention this is classified as an infill development. Boise City wants this micro street network. And obviously it would be started with Breezy Place. You see the pink area below the western 2 minor land divisions. There's going to be a development agreement recorded with the approval of the record of survey that mandates that the property owners implement this micro street network. And so they're planning on doing perhaps townhouses at the back in the future, but there will be a development agreement that formalizes the extension of that street network. Let's see. With regard to Shields Avenue and Ulmer, the streets do intersect. They were platted as 2 separate streets at the northeast corner of the subject site. One of the benefits of Breezy Place is it will complete the pedestrian facilities along Ulmer. If you would put slide 4 up, which is a Word document, I believe. Maybe it's a PDF. No. It's a photograph, so it's going to be one of the, is it slide 4?
For another one?
Yeah, I'm looking for the one that's the picture of the frontage of Ulmer. No, it just shows. Anyhow, when Matlock Place was subdivided, the street improvements for pedestrians extended halfway down that distance. The remainder of it from the half point to where the corner of Shields and Ulmer take place is empty. There's no pedestrian facilities. The site context is important, I believe, because it's walkable and bikeable with proximity easy to recreation, school, shopping, and retail services. It's walkable and bikeable to a major valley transit corridor, which is State Street. It also has close proximity to a major transportation corridor for vehicle traffic. It keeps vehicles out of residential neighborhoods as much as possible. And finally, it provides a homeownership opportunity that doesn't consume rural lands, and it doesn't increase public roadways substantially in the city of Boise. The ACHD staff report, we understand that the staff is required to be consistent with the Newport Place findings, which was the previous development. It was withdrawn before it got to Boise City Council or Boise City Planning and Zoning Commission due to site constraints and costs. And it was a different product type with service drives, not streets. So Shields and Ulmer, they're two platted roadways. There are no stop signs. They're local streets, and their posted speed limit is 20 miles an hour. I looked at the LTAC accident report information. There have been 2 accidents in this vicinity in the last 5 years. Neither of them occurred at this intersection. And they were only property damage accidents, no injuries. So slide 5, I think, would show that. Actually, I take it back. You don't have a slide 5. I apologize.
One listed as slide 5. Would you like me to pull it?
Is that labeled slide 5?
This one?
No, I'll get to that in a minute. Thanks. So the staff report states that there's a controlled stop intersection and that site distance standard is 225 feet. But we know already that there isn't a stop controlled intersection at this location. And the findings on the cover memo indicate that the point where Ulmer starts or Ulmer ends and Shields begins, it functions as a curve, even though it is platted as an intersection. The staff's concerns, in response to staff concerns, we did ask about putting a stop sign at southbound Ulmer. The response we got was that people don't often obey stop signs. So I don't know, I think it's still a good idea, but anyhow. So what happens if Ulmer Avenue is extended south, which is this slide right here? So we have a minimum offset of 16.5 feet from our east property line. So the southbound lane and the northbound lane will be really close to being in alignment. So you'll have a car driving north and a car driving south, almost in alignment. Furthermore, there's a mature tree canopy along the east property line that would have to be eliminated. And it should be noted that the Northwest Neighborhood Association has submitted written comments to the city of Boise, strongly supporting the preservation of these trees. By shifting the access to the west property line, we find that there isn't sufficient space between the existing residence and the property line for a half-street section plus 12. Again, the Northwest Neighborhood Association supports and recommends preservation of the existing residence as proposed. For traffic on Shields, I was running off the 2007 numbers, which gave us a 24-hour count of 490 trips. Apparently, that's dropped to 230. As Austin pointed out, the 2019 trip rate is 17 in the peak hour and 230 24-hour count, which is pretty darn low, I would say. So with the proposed increase of 170 trips from our development, we'll have about a 40% of the 1,000 vehicle trips per day. So 40% of capacity. If you increase that to 1,500 trips per day, we're even lower. There's just no traffic on this street. So this represents what, a 60% reduction. You probably don't need to hear about it. I was just going to mention that people may be changing their driving routes in the neighborhood. So leaving the proposed street in its current location, the visibility of the new street, which is the 2 Word documents. The applicant went out and actually,
That one first, or would you like the other one?
the other one, actually, that's the image of the, excuse me. Oh, yeah, this is right. So, that one and that one, yeah. I apologize. So the applicant went out and sat in his vehicle at the intersection of Ulmer and Shields and had the other property owner stand where the center line of the street would be. So clearly it's visible. It's not so far away that it's not visible. It's kind of a nice distance. Again, 20 miles an hour. If there's a stop sign there, it won't have much time to accelerate. The second image, if you would, Austin. Then they reversed it so that if you're standing at the center line of the new proposed street and you look east, you can see the intersection. So we believe that site visibility and site distance works for this particular location. We have written permission to clear out the vegetation at the corner if it's needed. So there's long-term benefits from this development. It's a new local street that helps Boise City implement their envisioned micro street network. It helps reduce access points onto Shields by consolidating access. And the completion of the pedestrian facilities along Ulmer to Shields, and then from Shields all along the street frontage, will encourage bike and pedestrian activity, especially with shopping so close. So in conclusion, we are requesting a waiver of district policy to keep Breezy Lane at its proposed location. And we are also requesting a waiver of the 125-foot offset standard, which Austin did mention. Apologize. So the applicant believes that moving the street will generate an economic and design hardship, will have a loss of one of the parcels. Whatever remains will be substantially downsized, and then there'll be a shared driveway. So the project will essentially go away if we can't keep the street where it is. There are unusual circumstances in that it's an older platted area that's being retrofitted for a more urban development, and the size of these lots and the location of the originally platted streets severely limits the options for reasonable development. Because the true alignment of Ulmer Avenue is not possible given site constraints, the proposed street is best retained at its current location. A street access adjacent to the east property line will result in a much reduced density and loss of proposed development site. Breezy Place, as I've mentioned, will provide benefits to the immediate area as well as the greater community because of the completed pedestrian facilities that are off-site. This development will enable Boise City to implement their micro street network, which is expected to be a benefit to the neighborhood. The site is ideally located for non-vehicle access or low-mile vehicle trips to all kinds of regular occurring stops that people make on a daily basis. Placing the access street along the east property line will result in the demolition of all the trees, which we think is a problem. And although it is speculation, I'm thinking that probably 16.5 feet won't be a sufficient buffer for having a street running along the backside of the Matlock Place subdivision residence. So they may actually, in Boise City, may grant an even wider buffer area, which pushes that street alignment even farther into hazardous alignment. So in conclusion, we believe there's sufficient site distance, that the street needs to stay where it's been proposed because it's the best location. And traffic on Shields is so low that it barely registers. 2 accidents in 5 years, that's pretty safe area. So with that, I would thank you for your time. We appreciate your consideration, and I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, any questions for the applicant?
Just have one question. You said you have a written agreement, permission to remove the vegetation?
To clean it up. Yes,
With
sir.
that property owner?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. So what would it take to have an agreement to basically have an easement to do that in perpetuity or?
Well, I don't know. That would be a discussion that would need to take place. I'm assuming that that lot at the northwest corner of Almer and Shields will be following suit at some time in the not too distant future. The development, there's so much development pressure in this area right now that a lot of the lots are converting. We can certainly try to accomplish that and would be happy to try to do so if that would be an important item for you. Sure.
I don't know. There's a lot of things that are new. It just came up in this testimony. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Thank you. Commissioner Baker, do you have any questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We do have some individuals that have signed up to testify on this matter, so I'd like to call you up front at this time. Michael Smith, if you would please state your name and your address.
That's not this.
Oh, it's not for this one?
I'm not for this.
Oh,
one.
I'm sorry. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Llewellyn? Thank you.
Richard Llewellyn, 9170 Hill Road. Madam President and Commissioners, I'll be representing the Northwest Neighborhood Association right now. This particular parcel, well, these two parcels together, they have gone through a number of different proposals over the years. And for the last year or so, when I've been involved in kind of hearing the neighbors' concerns, especially the neighbors to the directly east, it is true that what is now quite a nice mature tree-lined buffer along the eastern edge of the property is quite important to the people living just due east of that street, or not street, but proposed modification. So I do think, I guess it would depend on how much of a buffer was kind of negotiated with the city of Boise and the developer in terms of whether or not that would work well for the neighborhood, and whether or not that would increase the hazards by having an offset street like that. I can't speak to that, but we have, as a neighborhood, had quite a few comments about the importance of maintaining that kind of landscaped area, and that was one of the benefits of this particular proposal and plat, is that it did do that. And as far as moving it to the other side, again, we were happy that, one existing mature house, mature trees, mature house, could be left with this proposal. Unlike some other ones, they had proposed scraping that house. And it's quite a nice house, and it provides character, kind of existing history. So I don't know what the answer is in terms of where to put the streets, but either of the two options I heard today could be problematic. I just also want to take the opportunity to talk about what we as the neighborhood consider the important connectivity here. I haven't heard much interest regarding a street on the southern edge there, a micro street, but if you go a little farther south there, you'll see the border of that. It borders what is known as, on the map, the Spoilbanks Canal, or what we've always just called the drain ditch. But this has become an important feature to our neighborhood. It extends throughout our entire northwest neighborhood from Gary Lane out to Old Horseshoe Bend Road. And it is indeed a drain ditch. It's said to be the first project of Morrison and Knutson when they were young men. And I think that's why they call it the Spoilbanks Canal. They named it after the fact that they dug it out and made a big mound of dirt. It does have a year-round population of rainbow trout and aquatic invertebrates, crawdads. And as a neighborhood, we are attempting to create a path along this all the way from the east side to the west side of our neighborhood. Maybe biking, but definitely walking. And so this plat here, it's not necessarily the best for doing that. As you can see, there's kind of encroachment on the southern edge there along that potential easement. But one of the advantages that it did do, and working with the city of Boise, is it provided access and to the east-west border there. So in terms of connectivity, walking or cycling connectivity, whatever happens to this area, that is an important feature that we would like you all to be aware of. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Llewellyn?
No, thank you.
Commissioner Baker?
No, thank you.
Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak on this matter? At this time, did the applicant have anything more you'd like to add? Rebuttal,
Thank you. Do you need my name again?
please.
Penelope Constantakis. We are aware of the interest in the pathway along the Spoils Bank Canal or drain ditch. Boise City brought it up when we had our pre-application meeting with them, and so and we also agreed with Boise City to do a pedestrian and bike easement all the way down the street to make sure that people from outside the area or neighbors could easily and legally access any pathway system that would be implemented along the canal. So we were aware of that, and and the applicant's all in favor of the pathway system. There just hasn't been any kind of an agreement negotiated to establish an agreement between the irrigation district and the city of Boise to implement it, but it's in process, my understanding is.
Thank you very much. Commission, any questions, any further questions of staff? Hearing none, Commission, you have this item properly before you.
Madam Chair and members of the commission, I think there's still some things in the works that need to be worked out. It feels like we're coming down to whether we should, if we make a decision today, we're basically saying you have to tear down some trees on your property because you can't take down trees on another person's property over which we can't make you have an agreement. In order to have one of the two options is that I think there's things that still can be worked out. It sounds like, this is the first time I heard about the agreement to clear the property on the northwest corner. It's the first time we've heard and saw a map of the Boise City micro road, and the statement was made that in fact the decision is now made to make it a public street instead of a private one. So there just are too many things that still need to be worked out before we say, yes, you can't have your road in this location. It seems to me the site distance is the key reason why we want the road where it is. We've raised the issue. I think if we give it a month or two for them to work out, I have a feeling they're going to come up with an agreement that meets the concerns raised by the developer, by the neighborhood, and by the city of Boise.
Thank you, Commissioner Henson. Mr. Price?
Madam President, Commissioner Steve Price, General Counsel, I would just suggest that based upon Commissioner Hanson's comments that this item can be deferred until those issues have been addressed with staff. If that's the will of the commission, I would recommend that they remand it back to staff indefinitely. Staff will then come back, will post it and put proper legal notice and get it back on the agenda. We don't know when that's going to be completed. It could be a couple months, could be a couple weeks. So you can't defer it to a time certain.
Okay.
But that's what the recommendation is, send it back to staff until those issues have been addressed.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Commissioner Hanson?
That would be my motion to defer back to staff indefinitely. I see the city of Boise's here, so I know that they're still working on this too.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I would second that. I do have a concern about the safety aspect of having the proposed road where it is, because from all the emails we get virtually every day, nobody drives the speed limit in this county. I realize that's not quite true, but 20 miles an hour is just a little faster than I can run on a good day, and nobody wants to drive that slow. And so I worry a lot that the folks going south when they turn right onto Shields, won't be paying any attention. And I don't think this is proposed as a senior community, so there's going to be little kids crossing that street right there. Without the benefit of not only a stop sign, but an agreement to enforce the speed limit, I'm too scared to approve it as it is, but I would agree to have it deferred until some other things can be worked out.
Okay, I would concur with that. Safety is definitely first and foremost.
Madam President?
Commissioner Baker?
Yeah, I'll go along with the deferral. However, I just want to make a couple of comments. I do agree with Commissioner Goldthorpe that having the location of the road the way it is now coming out onto Shields is not optimal at all. And I do think something needs to be done. It needs to be placed on one side or the other. They're going to have to, and that would require a redesign of this plat. Also, this is a local street already, and I don't know what a micro street is supposed to do. Local streets are supposed to carry the traffic from the neighborhood and then put them onto collectors. So I just, if I had to vote on this today, I would certainly vote to uphold the staff report, and I hope that the developer takes those into account, because when this comes back, if it hasn't changed much, I will approve the plat the way the staff wants it approved. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Baker. Could you please, I heard you when you said if you had to vote on this today, and then you kind of broke up. Could you just maybe repeat that statement?
Okay, and I think you're actually talking a little too close to the microphone too. All I was going to say was that we have a the micro streets to me make no sense, because they are accessing a local road which carries very little traffic to begin with. I do think that if I was going to vote on this today, I would vote to uphold the staff, so the developer needs to take that into account, unless, you get 4 votes from somebody else. I think that the street needs to be moved, just as, and I have the same issues with it that Commissioner Goldthorpe did. It's in a terrible location, and I do think the subdivision needs to be redesigned, and that's not for us to do, that's for the developer to do. So, but I will go along with the deferral at this point in time. Did you understand that?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you very much, Commissioner Baker. So we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Commissioner Baker?
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's a little bit difficult to hear.
Yeah, Madam Chairman?
Commissioner Baker?
Yeah, I don't know if our new system's working that well, quite frankly, because your last comments were breaking up too, so I just don't know.
I'm sorry, we can have someone take a look at it. Sorry, I was maybe a little too close. Thank you, Commissioner Baker. We'll take a look at that.
Okay.
Now, go on to the next item on our agenda. Number 2, condemnation of right-of-way necessary for Meridian Road, Cherry Lane to Ustick Road, project parcel 15, 2210 North Meridian Road, Meridian, Idaho.
Madam Chair, I would move that we return item 2 back to staff indefinitely.
I second that.
Madam President, if I can, again, Steve Price, General Counsel, just for the record, that the matter, Dave Serdar and his team was able to get a settlement with the property owner about 10:30 this morning. So the order of condemnation will not be necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Price. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries. Okay, that takes us to our next item, public communications. Mr. Smith? If you state your name and address, please.
Michael R. Smith, businessman from Cuna, Idaho, 679 Best Business Avenue. Commissioners, Madam Chairman, I'd like to visit with you today about something that you probably never hear anything about, your impact fees. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the company Best Bath, but Best Bath at one particular point in time started moving to Cuna. They spent about $3 million on a 12-acre parcel, developed a business park called Swan Falls Business Park. At that particular time, they spent money on roads, they spent money on sewer, streetlights, you name it. They spent millions of dollars putting in this little park. Best Bath was not allowed to finish his project, but claims that he paid impact fees for the whole project when he started. He only built just a fraction of the buildings and of the project that he was going to. I took the property over about 2 or 3 years ago, and I'm building a small industrial park. I'm building a series of 6,000 square foot buildings so that we can create more jobs in Cuna, give more places business, to start up, kind of a little incubator kitchen, along with several other warehouse projects. And I'm sure that there's nothing that can be done about the thousands of dollars I've spent already, but I feel that I'm paying well over $1 a square foot with all the impact fees. I mean, your share is $6,000 to put up a 6,000 square foot building. I feel that that's a little hefty where I'm actually taking people off the road, fewer people commuting, putting them in a neighborhood that's already completely developed and been paid for, and want to know what your thoughts and if there's anything that can be done about the thousands of dollars per building I'm spending.
Commissioner Goldthorpe?
And it's your understanding that impact fees have already been paid for this?
It's my understanding that impact fees were paid in 2004 or 5 for the whole entire project, which was going to encompass about 60,000 square feet. They built the first half of the first building and stopped halfway, which you've been to the building, you can see why it slopes up. So as I build these other buildings, I think that I'm paying impact fees that have already at one time been paid. Even if they haven't been, is there a formula that you folks use? Is it just per square foot? Does it matter where it is in the county? Is it just a one-size-fits-all formula?
Mr. Smith, there is a formula, but if in fact your impact fees have already been paid, I think this is an issue that at least initially needs to be discussed in a little more detail with development services and.
Mr. Insel?
Madam President, Commissioners, if you like, you can have the gentleman speak with me and our impact fee administrator. If impact fees have already been paid, then we just need to verify that, and if it's the same use, then no additional impact fee is due. But impact fees are paid at the time of building permit. So if a building permit applied for or issued, it's unlikely the fee was paid. But if you actually started a building and stopped, then we can verify what was paid and move on from there. Regarding the rate for the additional buildings, there is a formula. It's the same countywide, but there's a process that if you believe your impacts are less, we can help you with that process to document that and verify if a reduction is warranted.
I believe that process also has like a 30-day time limit on it, if I'm not mistaken.
Madam President, yes, you have to apply to do the individual assessment within 30 days of paying the impact fee.
Okay.
But if this is a new project, that wouldn't matter with the prepayment from 2004 if you're starting over today.
And if they've already been paid, would there be any refund on the fees that I have paid on the first 2 buildings I've put in?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I guess from here, I just need to visit with you and,
Yes,
Correct.
Thank you for coming.
yeah, any other
We
questions?
appreciate it. No, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Inselman. Okay, any further items to discuss? Anybody else like to address the commission? Hearing none, we stand adjourned.